Time to trickle in. Starting. Are y'all ready for this? Dun 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 dun. Alright, I hope y'all are doing okay. It's been a crazy week. A lot of crazy stuff has been happening. Hope the audio's okay. I don't know. This has been a lot for me to go through all this while trying to do a talk on this kind of stuff, while also processing all the stuff that's been happening. But I think it's been kind of healing in a way. Yeah. Don't know if I should just get started or not. I'm gonna coordinate with the Babycastles folks. To trickle in. Yeah, this is a talk for Babycastles Academy. This is more lecture style, seminar style talk about kind of like culture and history and vocabulary around race that's like often not talked about in America. Even it's just kind of like you don't really think of Asians. It's just kind of like, we'll get into that. Yeah, streaming. Seems like I'm streaming. Just I'm gonna message a few more people. Are people here? Yeah, just making sure people, the tweets are going out and all that. Please check this out, folks. Could be slightly louder. Okay, I'll try to bring the microphone closer to me. And I guess the lighting seems okay. I could add a little gain to the microphone. Whoops. I don't know. I guess we can get started probably. Let me add a little filter here for the microphone. Volume gain. Okay, cool. And then okay, how's that? Whoops, that might be a little too high now. How's that? Whoops. How's that? Turning it up. Okay, maybe that's good. It's kind of in like a good range. Sorry for the Discord things. Okay, good, cool. Yeah, hope y'all are hanging in there after a crazy week. This will be uploaded on YouTube afterwards, so as I believe, if anything, we can get the highlight video going. I will double check with the organizers from Babycastles on that side of things, so if you're checking this out later, you can check it out later. Yeah. Okay, maybe we'll just get started. So, yeah, crazy times we're in, but yeah, we're going to be discussing, this is a presentation for Babycastles Academy on bamboo unicorns, a history, vocabulary, and proposal for Asian American game design, something that's not really often discussed or thought about even. Yeah, even just getting the conversations kind of started in little pockets here and there, I think is actually like kind of a big step. So that's why I felt like it was important to have this kind of like presentation done. And I had proposed this like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, but things have changed since then, even in the past 48 hours. So we're going to try and address some of those things. Yeah, all right. So, but before we get into all this kind of heavy stuff, which I'll try to like present in a lively way. Sorry for hitting the table. We just have a little palette cleanser here. Just this is a clip from Sesame Street with the cellist Yo-Yo Ma, who's of Taiwanese descent. And yeah, all right, let's check it out, and let's make sure the volume's okay. Whoops, volume. Let's get. Whoops.
What's going on?
Oh, they're getting ready to
that's really loud.
perform a quartet.
A honker and dinger quartet? Sounds interesting, Big Bird.
You think it's silly, huh? Well, let me tell you, Bob, they just rehearsed and they sounded beautiful.
Beautiful or not, Big Bird, it can't be a quartet because a quartet needs 4 musicians. And I only see 1, 2, 3.
But number 4 is coming right now. So if you just take your seat, I will introduce him. The Sesame Street Chamber Music Society is proud to present our very special guest, Yo-Yo Ma.
Thank you, Big Bird. We will perform for you the Beethoven Quartet for 2 honkers, dinger, and cello.
You wrote that? Ludwig van Beethoven? The famous composer?
No, Murray Beethoven, the famous honker.
Alright, wow, that's like a nice pleasant just palate cleanser to I don't know, just get us started. Yeah, so let's continue. Yeah, that was the cellist Yo-Yo Ma with 2 honkers and a dinger on Sesame Street. I like to include little like fun things to just I don't know, cleanse the palate from like all this stuff happening in the world and get us ready to come into this with a refined palate for new tastes and flavors and stuff. Yeah, anyway, okay, it's not a labor on that. But yeah, so why are we doing this talk now? Well, May was we're at the end of May, and May was celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. There's like some laws passed in 1978 and 1992 here, 1978 and 1992. Yeah, like for a while it just wasn't a thing to celebrate Asian American identity in America. So yeah, this is part of like that vein of like history where like Asian American identity has kind of been erased and has only recently become something people have been conscious of. So yeah, this is just bringing more of that consciousness to people, and it's very interesting how it's happened in this month of very much unrest and all that. But we'll address some of that in the coming slides. Yeah, and then I don't know, why else am I doing this? I do a lot of indie games, I do a lot of narrative stuff, a lot of socio-political stuff and emotional health stuff, and I also am involved with a lot of nonprofits for inclusivity and representation, one of which is Babycastles, as you can see here, also Friendship Garden. I also run an event at GDC called Unparty. It was going to have its 5th year this year, but you know, obviously canceled due to coronavirus. But yeah, so this is something that's been important to me, exploring representation in games, and but the kind of something that's been absent for me is Asian American identity as a game designer, just kind of very conspicuously absent. And I've been having some conversations around that in my semester wrapping up my first year at NYU Game Center's MFA program, and this past semester I did a independent study exploring Asian American mental health in games and how it can intersect with game design, and I developed some prototypes for that. So that's been kind of informing my practice in working on this presentation today. So yeah, I'm going to bring some of that into this. Alright, so yeah, like some housekeeping. What do we mean when we say Asian American? And what are we talking about in terms of Asian American stuff? This is Asia, it's all these countries. And then this is America. This is North America, clearly, not North America and South America. But yeah, just to be clear, there's going to be a bias here towards North America, primarily like the US and Canada. And when we're talking about Asian, it's a very wide group of people that can be included in that. So it's going to be biased towards East Asian, Southeast Asian, and some South Asian. Yeah, there's going to be some other stuff in there too. But just to be clear, like this is like going to be the biases I'm going to have towards this, or just like maybe just weighting towards those kinds of identities in particular. But yeah, this is, and even if this feels like something that isn't relevant to you as like, you know, an Asian American or non-Asian American, it actually is. Just want to tell you that right now, because if you're Asian American, it's going to catch up with you, and if you're not conscious of it, and especially even in light of the things happening very recently, but as we'll talk about, but if you're not Asian American, Asian Americans are an American identity, and it better informs your ability to interact with this group of individuals, and whose identities have been kind of erased. So yeah, I can't speak for everyone in Asia. I can't speak for everyone in America. Again, this is biased towards East Asian and Southeast Asian. This is biased towards US and Canada. I'm also not an academic. I don't have a PhD. I've also kind of been discovering this kind of stuff like recently, and this is also a bias towards in the realm of like creative geography, game design, and particularly digital game design. But there is some stuff for analog game design, but yeah, generally towards digital game design. Alright, so that's the housekeeping, and so let's do the overview. What we're going to talk about broadly, there's two major things: Asian American issues, because we should discuss that first before we get into our next major thing, which is Asian American game design. And of those things, of Asian American issues, there's history, demographics, facts and myths, invisible identities. And in Asian American game design, there's also a history of that, some definitions on like what that might constitute, examples of things that have done that and then have explored that, and then also some takeaways to take away from discussing the stuff we're exploring today. First, a thought experiment. Just a little thought experiment to like make this a little interactive. So picture the following. Now, so let's start with the left column here. Picture the following. If I say American history, you have like a lot of images in your head, like 1776, World War II, you know, Thomas Edison or whatever, Steve Jobs, whatever. Anyway, I don't know. Yeah. And when I say great American creatives, you know, what do you picture? You picture a lot of people, poets, artists, filmmakers. When you picture game design auteurs, who do you picture? A lot of indie game creators, a lot of creative directors at studios. Okay, cool. So you're picturing all those kinds of images and stuff. Now let's picture the following in the right column. Picture Asian American history. What do you picture in your mind? What critical events can you picture in your mind there? And then when I say great Asian American creatives, what kind of people do you picture there? Yeah. Actors, performers, filmmakers, artists. When I say Asian American game designers, what do you picture? And yeah, so this isn't like a gotcha if you were able to think of any things at all or whatever. But the question is more like, how hard was it to picture these things? Was it easier to picture things on the left column, or was it easier to picture things on the right column? And how difficult it was, the degree of how difficult it was, is something that is kind of present in our society. I can almost guarantee pretty much everyone who's going to be watching this is going to more easily be able to picture things on the left than on the right if they haven't been exploring these things actively. And I'm definitely guilty of that before I started looking into these things. And also the question is, how much overlap is there between like exceptional American moments and American creatives and game design auteurs versus like how much you imagine Asian Americans as those kinds of people? Yeah, how much overlap is there, and why is there a gap, and is that gap proportional to the population that represents those groups? Yeah. Is that overrepresented, underrepresented? I imagine underrepresented. Yeah, so yeah, that's like a tough thing that we're gonna work on today. So like again, like we were talking about geography, just setting the backdrop. We're also going to talk about demographics. Asian Americans, as of like I think this was from like either the 2000 or 2010 census. Asian Americans make up 4 to 5% of the U.S. population. They're, I believe, the fastest growing demographic in the U.S. If not the fastest, one of the fastest growing demographics in the U.S. Expected to, as of a past projection, they're expected to reach 6% by 2025 and 9% of the U.S. population by 2050. But, you know, 6 origin groups make up 85% of all Asian Americans, and then 15% make up like all others, which are like represented in different capacities. And yeah, like just as a backdrop, like there's like all these different groups getting lumped in together, which are like a wide variety of groups, which many of which have like very little in common with each other. You know, and like there's so much history and details that get lost when like being lumped together. So that's something that something to keep in mind, and we're going to talk more about that. So yeah, again, we're talking about Asian Americans because in general in America there's just this kind of like lack of cultural awareness around Asian American issues. Asian Americans are viewed as this model minority, as like, oh, it's not important to think about their issues. That's a misnomer. We're going to get into that. Just in general, in America, there's a lack of Asian history in public school education. We're going to get into some of that. And there's a lack of Asian American history in education, and also just like in the general cultural understanding of America, like through media beyond just our education system. So we're going to get into that. Just beyond that, there's also just a lack of foreign language classes. Typically, if there are foreign language classes in American schools, it's going to be of westernized languages, so it might be like Spanish or French or something. It's more rarely going to be like Asian languages, despite how big of a demographic they are and how much they are important economically and all that. That's also its own kind of talking point that we'll move on to the next thing. And then also in general, like there's a lack of cultural competency around Asian Americans in terms of like belief systems, manners, mannerisms, communication, religion, even biology in the medical field. When I was doing my independent study, there's like a lack of understanding around Asian ethnopharmacology. Like a lot of doctors might not even know like Asians have like, I don't know, there's just a lot of stuff. Whoops, maybe I'll close my messenger window. Yeah. Okay, so and then intersectionality, even if there is Asian American representation in and also media representation of Asians beyond just like education that everyone has to go through, there's also intersectionality issues where like even if you do understand things about Asian American history, it's usually of a very even Asian American representation can be very cis hetero patriarchal normative, or even like the patriarchal aspect can be kind of like messy when it comes to Asian American issues specifically. Yeah, in general, but the point being like there's not a lot of intersectional representation of Asians, so that involves like people of different genders, different sexes, different queer identities, different classes, age, ability, and different beauty standards and stuff. If you haven't done the census, please do the census. That's important, especially if you're Asian American, because that is part of the issue of like why people just don't view Asians as being visible, and because we're not participating in public life and civic life and all that. And we're going to talk plenty about that. So yeah, do the census and fill out your demographic. Don't just fill out Asian American, write it in. They've expanded it. I've done it. It only takes a few minutes. You could do the census while watching a 5-minute YouTube video. Like it takes a few minutes, very fast. So we're talking about Asian history. Just a reminder of Western history. This is the kind of traditional history you're taught in American schools, and but also like actually gives a little bit of a backdrop to Asian history and Asian American history. So ancient history with early religion, science, and trade, and then like the Middle Ages with like religious empires, and like the beginnings of global trade and stuff like that. And then 1700s to 1900s, the formation of nation states, formed from the legacy of imperialism into colonization driven by trade and using science and racial and like scientific justification of racial oppression. And then 1900 to 1945, broadly speaking, there's like definitely like bleed over between these time periods that I'm talking about, but broadly speaking, like 1900 to 1945 marked a giant period of industrialization, and then also the legacy of like those conflicts of nation states led to World War I and World War II, but also industrialization led to public education and labor rights, some would argue, and then also with all these kind of like the legacy of colonization and modernization and bureaucracy and industrialization, I think I said that twice, is the history of 20th century genocide, ethnic cleansing, and civil wars that still continue to this day, but sometimes isn't as covered when we're talking about Western history. Some even ending and still going on to today. And then like I view like this next chunk of history as like broadly 1945 to 2016 as being like a period of like corporations and globalization, globalized trade, and the military industrial complex and the Cold War. We're still living in the aftermath of the Cold War for sure. The fight between Western powers and Eastern powers after World War II, after like those alliances during World War II became not as important, and then we just went on straight into our next war period, but also at the same time there's this narrative of civil rights, but also with the narrative of civil rights is the forgetting of civil rights and integrating that into corporations and globalization into neoliberalism, and just paying lip service to civil rights, and also this idea of like post-racial America after like there's like great strides in civil rights, and interracial marriage was allowed, legalized, and like desegregation was legalized, and the election and leading into like up to the end of 2016, the election of Obama, we were in this post-racial society, and we even had like great strides in LGBTQ rights. Gay marriage was legalized during this time period. That was leading up to very recently in our lifetimes for most of us. But then 2016 to current day is marked by like this kind of like period of like tech conglomerates, social media, digital activism, maybe even digital propaganda, and like the ideas of like trickle-down economics and post-2016 authoritarianism under Trump's presidency in the US, and directly dovetailing into 2020 with COVID-19. So that's kind of like the history of Western history as we kind of like describe it from this very American whitewashed kind of perspective. But yeah, broadly speaking, yeah, there's this legacy of all these terrible things, from imperialism to colonization to neoliberalism to Trump. Yeah. So like, if you're wondering like why all this stuff is happening in our world, it's been stuff that's been this kind of fight that's been going on for a while. So maybe that's the consolation, is that this fight has been continuing, and we're just like the latest generation of this continuing fight. So hopefully that's kind of reassuring in some way. But anyway, the history of AAPI Americans, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, broadly starts with the California gold rush, and like the immigration of Chinese pioneers completing the Transcontinental Railroad, but also not being included in the history of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. Irish immigrants were building it westward. Chinese immigrants were building it eastward. Their lives were viewed as expendable when they were trying to find work after finding they couldn't find work found that broken promise of like the gold rush, and their accomplishments in completing the Transcontinental Railroad were erased. You see the photos of the Transcontinental Railroad being completed. Asians are not in the picture. They were told to be outside of the picture. So very early on, Asian American status in America, not so great. And then in 1882, there's the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first of several of many anti-Asian immigration laws, and that's gone in different waves. And then in 1902, the colony of the Philippines was acquired by the U.S. after winning the Spanish-American War, but then also was invaded by the U.S. during the Filipino-American War in order to subjugate them as a colony. Something it's not really talked about very much, but is also part of American history and Asian American history. Also, in like the 1900s, there's like the idea of the yellow peril, that Asians are gonna invade this country, that men are gonna take. I don't know how else to say this, but unfortunately, there's like the fear of like Asian men taking white women, and the fetishization of Asian women, illustrated by the illustrious careers of Sesue Hayakawa and Anime Huang in the golden age of Hollywood. Sesue Hayakawa, even though he was like viewed as like this handsome Asian American actor, he was also heavily discriminated against in his roles, because he would be typecasted as someone that's trying to infiltrate America, deceive Americans, gain access to white women and stuff. Very problematic. Anime Huang, also a very beautiful actress, very notable actress, but also dealt with typecasting as like this kind of like deceitful woman that's never like the main protagonist. And then even like she was going to be cast in the film called The Good Earth, but they didn't have her in a lead role. She was like the one negative Asian role in the film, but the lead roles were played by white people in yellowface, and that was rewarded by Hollywood because they actually won Academy Awards for that. Whereas like the Asian actress couldn't even get those roles, and was actually cast in a very negative role. So yeah, a history of like rewarding cultural appropriation and straight up racism, and like punishing Asianness for being Asian in America. Yeah. I don't know how to put that. It's fucked up. Anyway, then also during this yellow peril period was like the beginning of like labor discrimination. Like, I don't know, the continuing of labor discrimination. So like Asian men were like forced to like work in restaurants and laundry because those are viewed as domestic work. And that's why there's a lot of Chinese restaurants and Chinese laundromats and stuff like that. And then also in general, that's continued into our current day with the bamboo ceiling. And then with World War II, there was Japanese American internment and like the questioning of Asian Americans' loyalty, even beyond Japanese Americans, and even like this weird Asian American identity of like even Korean and Chinese Americans saying that they're trying to say, oh, we're not Japanese, and then even Japanese Americans saying, oh, well, I am American. And yeah, it's just this history of that in this country, continuing to today. And then from 1945 to 2016, there's like this increased globalization and human rights, push for human rights. To make this even bigger. But yeah, during globalization and the push for human rights in post-World War II was the Cold War and the ending of the Chinese Civil War, the recognition of the Republic of China as the government of China, and then also then later the representation of the People's Republic of China as the government of China by the UN, the Japanese occupation by the US, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, this continuing struggle between Western imperialism and Eastern nationalism in Asia. And then like that informs a lot of these generations of Asian immigration into the US, coming from these histories of intergenerational trauma, from this great kind of period of upheaval, and then seeking new opportunities in the US through like immigration acts of like the Immigration Act of 1965 and all that. And then also the ideas of like Asians trying to be the model minority and all that. But yeah, and then also during this time period, there's like all these economic miracles happening during the globalization period of Asia after like these periods of like upheaval. So yeah, there was the 4 Asian tigers on the graph on the right. They called the 4 Asian tigers for their economic growth. So we have South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And then also Japan's economic miracle going up and then kind of going down during their recession in the 90s. And then the Chinese economy, which has become this kind of elephant in the room, this kind of juggernaut kind of like thing that's like, I don't know, its own kind of set of things that I'm not going to talk about too much, but it's definitely a part of what's happening now. And we'll talk about a little bit of it, but it's very complicated. Yeah, and then also the Civil Rights Movement, which owes a lot of its debt to Black American struggle in the U.S., but also Asian American struggle in the U.S. has also built off of that. The Asian American identity was formed kind of after the murder of Vincent Chin in 1982. We'll get into that in some later slides. But yeah, in general, later on it leads to like neoliberal globalization, post-racial America, post-feminist America, that kind of even leading into like Gen Y Asians kind of like not even being aware of like racial struggle in America, yeah, or like kind of like, yeah, anyway. And then like also 2000s LGBTQIA plus issues such as gay marriage, and how that intersects with Asian American issues. And then post 2016 Asian American history involves authoritarianism, America's trade war with China, dovetailing into COVID-19 racism against Asian Americans beyond just Chinese Americans, which historically is like a thing that typically happens in America because of our history. But yeah, so the model minority myth, like Time Magazine, those Asian American whiz kids, there's like this push there's like a historical movement to push for the belief that Asian Americans don't struggle with similar issues compared to other minorities. And so like, yeah, I'm going to dispel some of those myths and kind of explain where they came from. But Asian Americans like don't suffer from the same mental or behavioral disorders as other minorities. Not true. Asian Americans are financially well off. Not exactly true. There's some truth to that, but not exactly true. And there's also Asian Americans are like, you know, all this kind of like stereotypes. They're smart, hardworking, good at math. Is not only meant to de-individualize Asian Americans and Asian American struggles and delegitimize these struggles, but that narrative was often used to put down other minorities. The Asians are hardworking, unlike X, Y, and Z minority. Black Americans, Latinx Americans, brown Americans in general. Yeah, so yeah, it's not really... and it's also even meant to like delegitimize Asian American struggle too. But yeah, so where does this come from? There's high levels of economic and like even to just go back to this slide. Okay, it'll come up next. Where did this come from? like if you just look at Asian American, it'll be in the next slide. If you just look at this broadly, like at this graph, from like different races from left to right: Hispanic, American Indian, Native Hawaiian, African American, white, non-Hispanic, and then Asian American, and then income going up from 10,000 to 70,000. These are median income levels by race and gender. Women on the left in the kind of like magenta, like kind of mauve, I guess, and then men in the green. Women, of course, earn less than men, just like fact. And then like if we're going from left to right, Asian Americans seem to seemingly earn more than all the other demographics by race when you kind of lump them all together. So this is kind of like why people view Asian American issues as like not as important and not as real. But this is, of course, a misnomer. Asian Americans are, of course, as I mentioned, heterogeneous. There are many different groups. You can see many of these different groups distributed here based on household incomes depending on their like individual groups. So all Asians might be at 73K as their median annual household income. But so many of those groups underneath Asian Americans are erased for having lesser incomes. Even like going down to like 36K for Burmese, 44K for Nepalese, 48K for Hmong Americans. Hmong are quite relevant to our current day conversation. Remember Hmong? And then also half of US Asians have at least a bachelor's degree. All Asians are at 51%, and some are above, but many are below also. Bhutanese are at 9%. That's less than 1 in 10. Laotian are at 16%. Hmong Americans are at 17%. Cambodian 18%. Vietnamese 29%. Yeah, again, we're seeing Hmong also. That's also something to remember. But yeah, so yeah, that's kind of dispels the idea that like all Asian Americans suffer from this great privilege as a race in America. But also furthermore than that, there's discrimination in labor for Asian Americans. And there's this concept brought up. It's kind of people laugh when I heard this sometimes when I bring it up, but it's actually like a kind of serious term. But I guess it's kind of I don't know what else you're gonna call it. Similar to the glass ceiling for women in America, there's also the bamboo ceiling. It's described as like this lack of upward mobility for Asian Americans. So like even if Asian Americans are doing well financially on average, they don't have a lot of like high positions of power, even in fields where they are overrepresented. So here we see Silicon Valley. There are like overrepresentation of Asian Americans, of course, in the professional level. But then as it reaches the managerial level and executive level, that same level of representation dwindles. That kind of illustrates like how even in these fields where they are overrepresented, they don't suffer from this. They don't take the benefit of like that model minority status. So this is of course rooted in fears that Asians should not be too powerful in America. One is like they're so passive, they lack leadership skills, whatever. And then also this like kind of historical fear of infiltration of Asian Americans into America in media, politics, management, sports. And there's also this fear of lack of loyalty to our country in America, going back to like 20th century history, Japanese internment, yellow peril, and yeah, of course this also happens in overrepresented fields, and also of course not even to speak of underrepresented fields. But yeah, and then this is another graph kind of illustrating that furthermore. This is percentage of doctoral scientists and engineers employed in universities and four-year colleges. So these are these are people with doctorate degrees in science and engineering, where Asians are overrepresented. But these are the percentages of them who are full professors by race and ethnicity and sex. So these are the percentage of people who have doctorates. All these people have the same education level, and this is the percentage of them that are full professors. And here, like, we see Asian women and Asian men underrepresented in terms of that. Even though they have like more of these degrees, they are not full professors oftentimes. Even Asian women are less represented than black women. Not to like play like Like, this is not like and I will emphasize, this is not a pain Olympics, a suffering Olympics that we're meant to compare each other's pain to each other. But yeah, this is this is just kind of illustrating how, like, even in fields, and of course this is like in comparison to white women and white men, who are like have much higher percentages. There's many different reasons for that. But yeah, I mean, even in these fields where they are overrepresented, even when they are getting higher levels of education, even getting higher income on average, supposedly when lumped together, they're still underrepresented in terms of like opportunities in America. So yeah, yeah. How's everyone doing so far? Are people okay? I feel like I'm moving kind of fast. Feel free to give me a thumbs up or whatnot. But let me just check how people are doing okay so far. Yeah. What else? Okay. Okay. I'm just gonna keep going. This will be uploaded later. Yeah. Assimilation. The issues of assimilation are very different if you're Generation 2 versus Generation 1.5, second generation versus Gen 1 or Gen 1.5. Just basic definitions around that. First generation immigrants to America are Americans who, I will say, like, came to America during their adult lives. They've like already formed like their formative years in another country in Asia, and then have come to America as an adult. Gen 1.5 can be kind of like during their early adulthood or adolescence or teenagehood. And then Gen 2 Americans are Asian Americans who are born in America and have fully internalized American education and culture in America. Often, and being the descendant to, and I say 2+, meaning that they're descendants of Asians who have been here for more than one or more generations. So yeah, so second 2+ generation Asian Americans suffer from like growing up in America as an Asian person. There's internalized racism. There's just issues with cultural appropriation of food, and also being made fun of for the food, and then also having, people take their food and then appropriate it, and then I don't know, if you mess with Asian food, man, that hits me in the heart and the stomach, man. That's a real bummer one. Man, I've been wanting so much Asian food during this COVID-19 times, man. Like, I bought like $30 at a Vietnamese restaurant recently, like $30 of food at a Vietnamese restaurant recently. Like, I just need something. Like, it's like not enough. Anyway, I should cook more. Anyway, and the grocery stores are tough. Anyway, food is, you internalize like, hey, my kind of food isn't the thing that everyone is having, and my food, I have to like always go to like my own neighborhood to try and get it. We have to cook it ourselves. We have to get suppliers for this stuff. I don't know, like, I can talk a lot about food, but yeah, in general, like, you internalize that your culture is secondary to the mainstream culture, and you're not someone that's representative of the typical American, despite the fact that you are American. And even people like you who are American aren't represented that much. So yeah, you internalize the racism of Asian people being, so Asian men, of course it intersects with gender as people of color, like with Black Americans struggle. Like, there's like different stereotypes about men and women. There's different stereotypes about men and women as Asians. So Asian men are sneaky, they're savage, weak, smart, passive, they know kung fu, good at math at the same time. Also physiology, even in terms of like their organs and stuff. We don't have to get into that. Asian women are exoticized, submissive, fetishized, deceptive. Yeah, terrible stuff, even with their physiology and stuff. Also, we don't want to get into that. Then also lack of representation and lack of, also just internalized lack of history of Asian Americans in America, just not being part of like what you should learn as part of American and Western history. You internalize that. and you also have not a ground to stand on. But yeah, Asian Americans are trying to so as a result from like these moments, you're trying to approach white, quote unquote, whiteness, that kind of privilege in America, that everyone kind of learns that there is different levels of privilege in America. Yeah, like you internalize that you're not from America, that you're aliens, that you want to be more American, that you are this model minority. It also intersects with like if you are like an Asian adoptee with like white parents and stuff who might love you, but also like just don't understand certain things. But yeah, this comic here from the graphic novel American-Born Chinese by Jean Lun Wang, or Wang, I believe, says here we have like a Asian immigrant boy trying to talk to a Asian American boy, and he's kind of dressed in like fobby, like fresh off the boat clothing and kind of style, and then so he's speaking in Chinese. That's what this like kind of brackets mean. So he's speaking in Chinese, and he says, "Sorry to bother you, but you're Chinese, aren't you?" And then the Asian American boy says, he's internalized it so much, he says, "You're in America, speak English." He's internalized whiteness. He's internalized that he has status over this other Asian boy, and that like he can wield that over him, and he's using the language of being oppressed to oppress other people, his own people even. You internalize that as a child here. I've internalized that for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So that, and then like first gen immigrant Asians deal with first gen or 1.5 generation Asian immigrants deal with different issues. Asian Americans, I should say, deal with like issues of lack of cultural context, lack of language from like learning it in childhood, lack of understanding of exactly how Asian American history works over here. Yeah, sometimes there is their own kind of like ahistorical understanding of how politics in America works. Also like the food and parental support sometimes if they're being like dropped off here as like a young person on their own, and oftentimes it becomes like in the status of like Gen Y parachute kids with the latest generation of Asian Americans, less so with Gen X, but becomes this new start where like you've suffered some kind of like rejection in Asia, and then you've been embodied in this different country in America, and you suffer that alongside with all the overwhelming stuff of dealing with all the language stuff too, and also that intersects with gender and queer issues also. But what is model minority status? You have this internal motivation as like an immigrant model minority to push for status and wealth. There's this push. The way I put it is that the push for achievement, status, and financial wealth is a push in this country where you're not welcome, to justify your presence, to exist, to justify your family's sacrifice for coming here, to achieve upward mobility despite your family's sacrifice, despite the history and legacy of Asian American discrimination in this country, and to justify your existence in a country that doesn't want you here, that views you as an alien, that views you as someone that's perpetually foreign, no matter how much you try to hide up into whiteness. So like when your Asian dad wants you to be a doctor and engineer, he's not just saying that because like, he's being mean or whatever. It's also because, there's a lot of things you're sacrificing by being here, and like hopefully you can justify it, quote unquote justify it, as an Asian American, that maybe in a way that white Americans don't have to. Also, you kind of have to be your parents' retirement plan a lot of the time. So you're faced with this as an Asian American. We're faced with this dilemma of model minority assimilation. We have this eloquently put in Hasan Minhaj's Netflix special. I honestly don't know who is more right. Maybe my dad is right. Put your head down. Be a doctor. Get a house in the burbs. Let them call you whatever you want. Don't rock the boat. Cash in your model minority privilege. Just be a model minority. Don't draw attention to the fact that you're Asian or make demands or anything. Just hide your way into like privilege into America. But alternatively, he also offers He says, I'm like, nah, I'm in honors gov. I have it right here. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal. It says right here, I'm equal. So yeah, that's also part of the Asian American identity, is like, you can also demand your rights. You can go for your dreams, and you can pave the way for future generations in a country that will discriminate against you. And like every Asian American, the status of every Asian American is to negotiate their, and I guess every American is to negotiate their status between their privilege and also their oppression, and decide where they want to lie on how much bullshit they want to deal with as part of their struggle, and also the struggle of future generations and their community and their current generation. And yeah, that directly leads into a little discussion of civil rights. 1945 was the end of marks the end of World War II, and the period of Japanese American internment. And Yuri Kochiyama was Asian American activist, Japanese American activist, who struggled along with Black American struggle during the Civil Rights Movement. She was right there with Malcolm X when he was assassinated. She was like cradling his head after he was assassinated, and she took learnings from like Black American struggle into Asian American struggle in America, and that was like part of like what allowed for like the immigration laws of 1965 and model minority status to happen, was like Asian American struggle being able to build off of Black American struggle as people of color in this country. So yeah, and that's a theme that we'll be revisiting. And then 1982, the murder of Vincent Chin. During anti-Japanese sentiment in America during Reaganomics, Japanese factories taking up American jobs. Vincent Chin was murdered by white men. He was Chinese American. He wasn't even Japanese. Doesn't matter in this country. You, as an Asian American, you can almost convince yourself that that you have enough privilege that like people will like, you know, not view you as a person of color, but sometimes you have these rude awakenings that you are a person of color in this country, and that was a rude awakening for a lot of Asian Americans in 1982, and was kind of what led to the modern Asian American movement and identity. Also in 1992, just 10 years later, the LA riots. After the murder of Rodney King, there was like a lot of tension in LA and in the country, and also a Korean American business owner. Korean Americans seem to like not follow American news as closely, but a lot of Korean American business owners in LA were in Black communities. Asian Americans were trying to find their way to find upward mobility, but it led to a lot of class tension with Korean business owners like kind of like taking business away from Black communities. And yeah, a Korean American store owner had shot a Black woman, a Black girl, even like a 15-year-old Black girl. And yeah, that led to the LA riots turning against Korean business owners, and Korean Americans thought that they had enough privilege to be protected by the police and by the National Guard, but they weren't. So Korean Americans even were like taking up guns to like protect their businesses during the rioting, and yeah, like that's a stark reminder of how Korean American identity was formed through the lack of cohesion with other people of color and through racial tension in America. Yeah, and then like yeah, seems like this is a recurring narrative, huh? But and that comes into 2016, where again there's a lot of like killing of Black Americans by white American cops, and they would get away scot-free. But then when it came down to like Peter Liang, a 28-year-old Chinese American NYPD officer, he discharged his weapon, and the bullet ricocheted off a wall and killed a Black man. Of course, he was found guilty, giving justice to the Black American community, but and of course it's a tragedy, and we want to like acknowledge the suffering of Black Americans. But how come when it comes down to a police officer being prosecuted in America for the killing of a Black man, it's it's an Asian American police officer. Yeah, and like, oh, Asian Americans kind of are like, you know, they're basically kind of white, kind of, but they're not. They're people of color, and yeah, this is like a recurring thread. We think we have the status, we don't have the status. We think we have the status, we don't have the status. We want to have this status, we never have this status really. And then that ties into like 2020 with COVID-19, discrimination against Asian Americans despite being like members of the community, despite not even being Chinese, despite being Chinese, anti-Asian discrimination over the past several months. There's been a spike of like anti-Asian hate crimes and violence in America, and then even another aspect of this is even last week with George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd. Something to talk about is like how it does intersect with Asian American issues very directly, because one of the police officers complicit is To Thao, who's a Hmong American, Asian American, and Hmongs are, you know, while being lower education and income on average and like facing discrimination, dark-skinned Asian colorism against dark-skinned Asians, that doesn't excuse him for being complicit in the pain of like and suffering of Black Americans. But it also doesn't necessarily mean that like Asian Americans should be like these like, I don't know, doesn't mean, I don't know, you have to pick your side. We face this dilemma as Asian Americans, which I don't view as a dilemma, but we face this dilemma as Asian Americans, that we can either try to hide up into our whiteness and ignore the fact that we are Asian and like use our privilege in order to escape consequences with other people of color, or we can have solidarity with people of color and view our struggle as the struggle of people of color and also the struggle of all human beings, because human rights, as Oz will say later, human rights, Asian American rights is kind of a red herring. It's really about human rights overall, and Asian American rights is just the demand to have the same human rights as other Americans. So yeah, and if you hide up into your whiteness and try to use your model minority status to escape like the justified hatred of the justified suffering of like other people of color in this country, you're playing into the same game of white supremacy in this country. And you know, Asian American struggle is human rights struggle, is Black American struggle, is the struggle of people of color. And yeah, Yellow Peril supports Black Power. This was like a from the 2016 Peter Liang coverage by NPR. Erica Lee, author of Making of Asian America, says, "We do have this privilege of not always having to pay attention to these issues as model minorities. And then sometimes when it does hit our community hard, it's a very politicizing moment because it feels new." This is genuinely true. Like, this is a recurring theme that has happened over history in Asian American history. We may be shocked into thinking this could happen to us too when we thought we might have been protected. This is something we forget about through neoliberalism, through post-racial America, but yeah, like it's something that's been present throughout Asian American history that sometimes we forget about. As being Americans, we are ahistorical and apolitical. But yeah, so yeah, visibility, and then even being visible as Asian Americans, we just aren't seen. I've been kind of going pretty long with this set of slides, but maybe we will go to 2 hours then. But yeah, so we're wrapping up on this section. Just a few more just 2 more slides after this, and then we'll take a break. But yeah, so yeah, visibility as Asian Americans, just to even be seen as Asian Americans, we have to play into stereotypes in order to even be seen by white Americans sometimes, or even non-white Americans, even other people of color, or even by our own race. Can't even tell you how many times I've been frustrated seeing Asian Americans make racist TikTok videos against their own race. It's so frustrating. We have Andrew Yang on the left here. Like, there's a vast underrepresentation of Asian Americans in politics, but even to be seen, he was playing into like Asians in math just to be acknowledged by Americans. And I had a conversation with a stand-up comedian who wouldn't get laughs with his white audience, but then he would make a joke about. His joke was literally, why don't you see poor Asian Americans on the street very often? It's because Asian Americans are so skilled at many things, in particular suicide, and that got a huge groan when I saw that in a night of Asian American comedy. But of course, because that's messed up, because it's playing into two stereotypes: Asian Americans are skilled, Asian Americans are not poor, and also Asian Americans, also the very horrible facts that Asian Americans have a very high suicide rate. But the reason why he's done it is because like he was so used to saying that in front of white audiences, and that was the joke that would get a laugh from white audiences, because they wouldn't engage with his other material and acknowledge him as an Asian American unless it was fitting some narrative of him as like what they expected as an Asian American. And propping up is kind of like this stereotype of like playing into your own racial stereotypes in this caricature in order to make white Americans laugh. And there's a history of that in Black American history too. We have a lot of representation now, a diverse kind of set of representation, men and women, but we can definitely go further in media, in politics, in sports, in management, in history, but we're still getting there. Even in the past 5-10 years, we made huge strides, but it's still a long way to go. So just a little summary of this past section. We went over Asian American history. We discussed misnomers of model minorities. We talked about assimilation, the motivation to assimilate, the dilemmas of Asian Americans, both Asian Americans and Asian immigrants. We talked about visibility as Asian Americans, how we're not seen unless we do certain things. Also the false privilege we have historically. We feel like we can hide into our privilege, but we honestly don't have privilege. And also our representation in the public life and political life and civil rights. Alright. So, next section is games. We talked a lot about Asian American history. Let's do like a 5-minute break. I'm just going to get some water and then I'll be back in 5 minutes. And we'll continue this talk. I'm going to play the clip again while you're taking a break, and I'll be right back.
Hi, Big Bird.
Oh, hi, Bob.
What's going on?
Oh, they're getting ready to perform a quartet.
A honker and dinger quartet? Sounds interesting, Big Bird.
You think it's silly, huh? Well, let me tell you, Bob, they just rehearsed and they sounded beautiful.
Well, beautiful or not, Big Bird, it can't be a quartet because a quartet needs 4 musicians. And I only see 1, 2, 3.
But number 4 is coming right now. So if you just take your seat, I will introduce him. The Sesame Street Chamber Music Society is proud to present our very special guest, Yo-Yo Ma.
Thank you, Big Bird. We will perform for you the Beethoven Quartet for 2 honkers, dinger, and cello.
You wrote that? Ludwig van Beethoven? The famous composer?
No, Murray Beethoven, the famous honker.
Hello, folks. Let me get my webcam back. Okay, I did not see the comments because my stream chat was hooked up to the non-Babycastles chat, but I'm checking through the chat. Yeah, just browsing through it. Yeah, thanks for all the compliments. Yeah, please, if you are participating in the events today, those are important. Like that's also, of course I'll support that because Black American struggle is also Asian American struggle. So you are actively participating in the history of that by participating in that. So wow, really great comments here. Yeah, proactively, not reactive. Yeah, there's like this narrative of like Asian Americans always participating reactively. Yeah, just there was something bad that happened because we weren't aware of like our kind of like transient status in America as Asian Americans. Yeah, really great. Awesome, great. Thank you so much. Okay, yeah. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for the compliment on the poster, Otis. Cool. Okay, maybe we'll continue. So yeah. Okay. Games. So yeah, so we've gotten some background on Asian American history and the context for all that. But let's also talk about games history a little bit. I don't know if people are like coming back for a bit, but okay, I'm gonna keep going. I don't know if people are here or not, or if they just went to the bathroom break or something. I wish I gave more of a clear signal as to when I was coming back. Okay, people are here. Okay, cool. Awesome, glad you could join. Okay, nice to see y'all. Cool. All right, let's continue. Games history. So yeah, just to like give like a little background in games history. I just saw like a really great podcast by Rebinds.io. It was run by Emily Rose, and I forget if that's her full name or not. It's run by Emily Rose, and like she interviewed Liz Ryerson, doing a podcast on a people's history of indie games, and I was like, yeah, it's kind of weird like to think about the history of games, and that honestly like informs like a lot of like a current context, like with Western history, like Asian American history. The history of games also informs the current context. So yeah, let's do a little brief overview of games history at the same time. Yeah, that's a great link. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah, so digital games history. So yeah, it kind of starts in like 1960s Silicon Valley. The beginning of personal computers, games as consumer electronics. There were games that were like the games were largely reserved for universities for research, because of like how expensive they were, but the beginning of like cheap components and like easily distributable components for like personal consumer use kind of began like consumer games consumption. And then later on there's like also like continuing that legacy, there's like consoles, and like also in parallel with that is analog games and RPGs and D&D and sci-fi and fantasy, and like really influential games in a non-games context overlapping with games context and stuff. But then like also arcade games, console games, the golden age of arcade, console games, games made in Japan, games made in the US, places where there was a lot of infrastructure for electronics hardware, and education around that. And then also like, this is just really, really, really broad. I'm sure I'm gonna like, if you were to like you could easily tear me apart on all this stuff, but I'm speaking very, very broadly here. just to like give like some broad context to games history. But yeah, late 90s was like 64-bit processing, 3D games, CD-ROMs, web games, beginning of mobile games on like early cell phones and then like later smartphones. By 2008, there was like the full division of Xbox Live Arcade and Steam. The advent of Xbox Live Arcade and Steam began the division between AAA and indie games. It was also happening at the same time as the 2008 recession hitting the world, and also the beginning of the Obama administration. I think that's also important to note, the overlapping of history with games history. And then 2014-2015 was like the 1-2 punch of like Gamergate and Indiepocalypse. Those are historical moments in games history that are quite relevant to our conversation when regarding people of color. Then the 2016 election, and then also the continuing democratization of Unity, and like tools for making games. And Unity goes to a subscription-based model by 2016. And then 2020, we have our current day store wars between Epic and Steam, and also COVID-19, games being consumed under COVID-19. Yeah, like this is all kind of stuff we kind of knew already, but it's kind of just really important to the backdrop of all this stuff we're going to talk about. But so yeah, I believe if I'm looking at my slides correctly, we're going to be talking about principles of like what could be Asian American game design. I originally had a summary slide that was like breaking it out in one thing, but now it's kind of broken out. But yeah, so what are the things that could be Asian American game design? Well, one is like you want to have Asian American and Asian cultural elements being represented in a realized, humanized, realistic way. So that includes language, history of oppression, food, love food, arts and culture, everything. And like, yeah, this is Always Be My Maybe on Netflix. They're in an Asian restaurant, and like it looks like a legit Asian restaurant. It's, you know, they have like the dorky cups and stuff, and like the stuff on the wall. It's not like those kind of like the one in MIB where there's like a dragon in front, and like, you know, it's like I don't know, like MIB3 had like a Chinese restaurant in New York, but they had to build the set because they didn't want to use a real Chinese restaurant. They had to build what a fake Chinese restaurant looks like to the idea of like white Americans. So like I call that problem like realized cultural elements, in contrast to the Disney's Panda Express problem, where you have cultural representation represented in an apolitical, ahistorical, sanitized, whitewashed, pandering, and commodified version of Asian culture and Asian American culture. I think that kind of summarizes it. And then also representation of individuals, their faces and bodies as Asians, and as a multitude of individuals being humanized. So that includes like having like characters that are all Asian and pan-Asian, and also queer, and also differently abled, and, you know, of all different marginalized genders and or sexes. And also just not stereotypes. So yeah, we don't want Asians as stereotypes. We don't want tokenized Asians. We don't want Asians as unicorns, where they're like this, oh, there's one Asian out of like this full crowd, and not only are they Asian, it's kind of weird how they're also queer and also disabled and also all this other stuff. So yeah, I was like looking at my copy of Tanya DePass's I think we'll get to that later. So yeah, before we get to that, even the representation of games of Asians in media are often stereotypes. Even by Asian creators, like there's a lot of Japanese games that make it over to the US, but oftentimes these are stereotypes, or depict white characters. So Asian stereotypes such as kung fu fighters or yakuza thugs. It's even problematic how games depicting the Vietnam War, the protagonists are these white players, but they're, you know, of course, like fighting against Asian people. And this was like one of the few kind of journalistic research articles that discussing Asian representation in games media. And it was a number of years ago, and I don't know if there has been many things of its kind since then. But yeah, yeah. And then before it was like I was talking about representation in the media itself as these characters, but also it's important to talk about representation in the industry that directly relates to the representation of these characters, directly relates to representation of these cultural elements. Here on the left we have industry representation. This is a photo of a Game Devs of Color Expo. Again, we don't want to have the unicorn tokenized problem again. I was looking at, and like before, I was talking about the issue of unicorns in the games industry. This is a passage by J.C. Lau in Tanya DePass's Game Devs and Others. It was edited by Tanya DePass, and it's on CRC Press. Being a unicorn in the games industry, J.C. Lau talked about that. She says, quote, "I was once featured on a podcast on women in games where I was described as a quote-unquote unicorn, a queer woman of color in the games industry. And when she thought about it, she examined it like she was probably the only person of her kind in a studio of 600 coworkers. That's like, even statistically, that's underrepresented. Just pure numbers. And also, they had like largely male people and largely white people. And also note when she's saying unicorn, she's called a unicorn for being a queer woman of color. But here's the thing, being a unicorn is neither intentional nor desired, nor even like exactly a compliment in this context. I'm a unicorn because people use the word despite to describe my achievements, rather than refer to my actual talents. She's not a unicorn because she is very talented. She's not a unicorn because she's amazing at her work. She's a unicorn because she's able to be so good at her work despite her talents, in this kind of like weird reverse microaggression discrimination kind of thing. So I am a unicorn because I exercise absurd amounts of emotional labor daily, imposter syndrome, mansplaining, white-splaining, queer-splaining. I am a unicorn simply because I am an other. And that's like oftentimes when it comes to talking about Asian Americans representation, both in games industry and in America and the world at large, we don't talk about intersectional identities amongst Asian Americans. And then when it came to, of course, diversity in the game industry is important, and I've tried to find statistics on this, and workers, this is from IGDA's 2014 and 2015 Developer Satisfaction Survey, their diversity in the game industry report. Workers of color were particularly underrepresented in senior management roles at only 3%. In contrast, 23% of white respondents reported occupying this role. That's like, just says a lot about things. And then even as a backdrop to me explaining this, so like this just breaks it down in terms of like workers of color and white workers, workers of color, white workers, workers of color, white workers. And of course, like workers of color earn less, are less likely to earn more than white workers. But another aspect of this is it's really hard to find data on people of color in the game industry. Like, this is workers of color versus white workers. There's no breakdown by race here. This report was like, and also this was one of the few reports I could even find about race that discussed race in demographics of the game industry. There wasn't a lot of stuff even when I was looking for stuff regarding diversity, it was often dividing between women and men. There's probably a lot of reasons for that something to think about and look into. Wonder why. And then in general, like with the history of tech, even with tech, Asians are the least likely group to be promoted from individual roles into management less likely than any other race, including blacks and Hispanics. Even blacks and Hispanics, this is not like even though you view like Asian Americans are this model minority, blacks and Hispanics are like in this particular way like more likely to have an advantage than Asian Americans. And white professionals are about twice as likely to be promoted into management as their Asian American counterparts. This is by Harvard Business Review. This is in 2018. This is of Asian American white collar professionals. Again, this is the bamboo ceiling. You know, again, I will like not say that like Asians are more oppressed than Black Americans and Hispanic Americans. I'm just saying in this particular way, Asians have the bamboo ceiling issue. That's a separate issue. And yeah, this is not like, again, we don't want to do the whole pain Olympics, oppression Olympics. And but yeah, it's just important to be aware of like how the different hierarchies manifest themselves in America. This next slide is a little tricky. There's going to be some geisha costume here in this next slide, so just be aware of that. I describe this problem as the rhythm and blues problem. What people of color want from white allies, they want genuine allyship. They want, oftentimes, like when people are trying to make representation of Asian Americans and Asian peoples in their games and creative works, they do it in this really awkward way that's tone deaf, that like oftentimes even is trying to use like the coolness and the coolness of the aesthetics of Asian inclusion, but not actually do the work of like understanding the history and suffering and oppression and pain that Asian Americans and Asians have gone through throughout history. So yeah, I've talked with my friend Nia about this a lot. Like with Black American experience, people want the rhythm, but they don't want the blues. Same thing with Asian American experience. People, oftentimes they want the rhythm, the coolness, the exoticized nature of like Asianness and Asian elements in their games and works, but they don't want to deal with the politics, the history, and the suffering and all the messy stuff that's super important to acknowledge in the history of all that. And if you want to do true allyship, you need to do that also. And that also includes by Asian Americans and Asian developers themselves too. Admittedly, Asian Americans could be more aware of those things and those elements also. This is how the model minority dilemma manifests itself in the industry also, is what do you tell your Asian parents? You're telling them you're a game developer. It sounds kind of funny, like, Mom, Dad, I'm a game developer. But, honestly, like, I've talked about, like, the model minority of, like, hiding up into white privilege and, like, model minority status in America. Like, you can cash in that model minority privilege. You can keep your head down. You can take the comments. You can, like, not rock the boat. You can get that house in the suburbs. But if you're going for the struggle of, like, being an artist, being a creator, being someone who's actively engaged with these things, I don't know, like, it's a struggle. And it manifests itself in different ways. And, like, also your parents have suffered and gone through intergenerational trauma. And they've also, like, some friends are checking in on me, that's cool. But, like, there's Asians and, like, and your parents have gone through likely intergenerational trauma. They come to the new start of sacrificing and coming here. And so you tell them you're a game developer, and they're like, what are you doing? So oftentimes Asian Americans might manifest itself, at least in my observations and in my own experience. Asian game developers are not only going to push for games as art, they're going to push for games as high culture. They're not like low culture, that's like addictive stuff that like Asian parents are like, don't play games, you're addicted all the time. It's very stigmatized in Asian communities. And if you go to an arcade in Asia, in like China or something, sometimes it's very like kind of like shady or whatever. And like games are kind of attributed to this stigmatized thing in Asia as well as in Asian culture as well as American culture. But but also games are but so yeah, there's this push for games to be art. Games are high culture, but also games are high tech. They're not art, because if you say art, it might be scary. It doesn't make any money, but games are also high tech, so they can make money and stuff. So you also feel motivated to not only make games as art, but also games as financially valuable, but also games as like all these things at the same time, and to prove to your parents that like this was a good decision. So yeah, that results in a lot of Asian American game developer anxiety. Yeah, there's like some comments. Yeah, this will be archived later. Whoops. So yeah, and yeah, speaking of representation and rhythm and blues, Asian Americans need to play into the rhythm and blues of their own culture. If you think you can hide into white privilege, if you think you can hide into model minority privilege, that rug has been pulled out from underneath us again and again over many generations of Asian Americans. It always feels like a rude awakening, but it comes back to bite us in the ass again and again, and it's happening even in our current day. And so yeah, of course, Yellow Apparel supports Black Power. If you are participating in that, that's great. Yeah, again, like To Thao, one of the police officers, complicit. He wasn't like actively doing it, but he was complicit in it. He was he allied himself more with white supremacy and his model minority status than with the status of human rights and the status of people of color. Again, like, I can only speculate, but like being Hmong American, that intersects with like systemic oppression of being like model minority, but also like lower education, lower income, poverty. He's a police officer. It is complicated, but like that's why these conversations are so important, is because sometimes as Asian Americans we are too willing to like hide into that implicit white supremacy that we know we can hide up into. But that's why it's important to have these conversations with Asian Americans and make sure we're all aware of like our status in America and acknowledge human rights over white supremacy. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's just so like a little palate cleanser, a little bit. We're gonna talk about existing representation, some fun things here. We're gonna start off a little not so great, but kind of awkward kind of stuff. But it gets better as time goes on in this next section. Yeah, you have to like, as an Asian American, you have to explain like, no, I'm gonna make money, mom and dad. Like, yeah. Early representation of Asian Americans and Asian culture by the West in games is kind of awkward. There's a great Twitch podcast by Asians Represent. I've joined their community. I've like been participating in their community a lot, and they've been doing this great deep dive into like talking about Asian representation in official Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, Oriental Adventures by Gary Gygax. Orientalism, right in the title. That's just the start of it. It's this weirdly like pan-Asian thing, but it's also very Japanese, but also vaguely like kind of pan-Asian, but also not really engaging with the culture. They wanted the rhythm but not the blues is the biggest summary I can say of that. All those podcasts are worth checking out. They're on YouTube. They're also on Twitch, so check them out. Asians Represent. They're like a more analog games kind of like space. I wish there can be more digital game space discussion of this. But on the right we have Shell, who's vaguely Asian American. She was modeled after a Japanese American person in real life. But even like in her depiction, the creators acknowledge that they just wanted a blank canvas, so she is not characterized in any way as being Asian American. Other than just like her physiology and like maybe like vague backstory, but yeah, so like right now, of these two, like we're already seeing this kind of like rhythm but no blues, whitewashed Disney's Panda Express kind of version of Asian representation. And then we're also seeing a neutralized Asian representation where we're not drawing any attention to her Asian cultural background or elements, and like, oh, she's Asian, but like she's not Asian. And then but yeah, there are positive representations of this. Milos Hantani and Marina Kataka made this game, All Our Asias, about Japanese American coming, like, trying to understand his father's struggle and the struggle of Asian Americans in America. Really beautiful, cool PS1 graphic style. I played it on my Twitch stream. Really a pleasure. And it directly, and not only does it like just have those as characters for their backgrounds, it directly engages with the status of being Asian in America and being a second generation Asian American. And not only like directly addressing those things, but actually wrestling with those kinds of like philosophical, moral dilemmas that like are at the heart of like Asian American identity. So yeah, really a pleasure to play that. And then also there's been queer representation in games, indie games. Most notably, people always would probably think of like first thing is like Butterfly Soup from 2017 by Brianna Lay. I should definitely give credit to the creators, because credits are important. But yeah, Brianna Lay made Butterfly Soup, representing 4 different Asian Americans of all different characterizations, personality types, and quirks, of all different backgrounds. And their backgrounds were part of their characterization. It wasn't neutral, it wasn't whitewashed, and it was a multitude of them, and also a multitude of queer identities even. So like, that was in 2017. We like, we made it pretty far, like with the momentum from like Obama's American queer progress and stuff like that. But like, since then, I feel like it's kind of a struggle to see other stuff that has been like kind of like following in the legacy of that. Actually, like there probably are more things I can think of. But yeah, like it came miles ahead of a lot of other things, but like there's still plenty more representation. We could definitely afford to have more representation of this kind of representation. But anyway, and then even Coming Out Simulator in 2014 by Nikki Case. I don't even think, in all the readings and all my understanding of this game, it was billed as like a queer game, but this was specifically about an Asian American experience. And I don't even think the creator kind of like framed it as a Asian American experience. I met the creator multiple times. I didn't bring this up, but like during my research, I thought back, oh yeah, Nikki's game. Like, this is this is an Asian American experience intersecting with queer identity. Yeah, like straight up, like, and it happened in 2014. Yeah, we could definitely afford to have more of that. And then yep, Lion Killer by CC Jang, who's also been in the news recently. And then also Yellowface by Mike E. Ren. I mean, I happened to find this just by like typing in Asian American into itch.io in the search bar, and this like just kind of like, this is a game that directly addresses Asian American issues in like this kind of cool mechanic. I don't know, like and like you're having conversations with casual racism with like people in white America, and like and this is this bar that measures how Asian you feel, how American you feel, and also even dealing with it with other Asian Americans. Yeah, like I don't know, like I feel like more people should know about this game. It's doing amazing things in this space. I feel like this is not nearly explored enough, and like this is like a great game that's exploring that. So yeah, please check out Mikey Ren on his Yellowface. Yeah, really fantastic work. He retweeted this Twitch stream before it started, and yeah, many thanks to him. I'm like happy to like plug his work, and he's done many other work regarding his experience as an Asian American, some stuff involving coronavirus also. So please check out his work on HIO. And then this next game is complicated in multiple ways, but it does. For one, is that it's made by the lead designer is Ken Huang, who's Asian Australian. It's part. So I will say this is maybe not Asian American per se, but it is part of the Asian Western Anglo diaspora, where there is a lot of kind of similar overlap of those issues. It's important for Asian representation in the West. Conversations where there's specific cultural elements and language elements, and these characters are characterized by their backgrounds, both East Asian, Australian, and South Asian, in a romantic context, in a inclusive context, in a also it's complicated furthermore by Ken Huang's actions as revelated in the September of last year, during the backlash during all that. And I will celebrate this representation of this game. This game did do a lot of great things for Western Asian representation in the West, but that does not excuse what he's done as an individual, and that's something that definitely needs to be acknowledged. And he as an individual should be held accountable for what he has done. And then Jenny Zhao Sha's work, multiple games involving Asian women's body issues, and I think also is the Asian American women's body issues, and the intersection between Asian American women identity with femininity and beauty standards for Asian women in America. She's a collaborator with my roommate AP Thompson, who's not credited enough. So yeah, shout out to AP. Although this is about Asian issues, and then also in the history of this, I talked about 2014 Gamergate. I was looking very closely at that, and I was like, is there an Asian American connection to Gamergate? And there is, very directly, primarily regarded Anita Sarkeesian, Brianna Wu, and Zoe Quinn. And then Anita Sarkeesian, her parents are Armenians from Iraq, and that's part of Western Asia. And people have used her West Asian background against her in harassment, directly. It's a part of the culture of Gamergate to use racialized backgrounds against women post Gamergate. And then also a year after, around 2014 or so, during the heyday of Gamergate, there's also Reddit was having a big crackdown on just really terrible boards. And then Ellen Pao was the interim CEO, and she's Taiwanese American, and one of the most Taiwanese American CEO in Silicon Valley. Seems like one of the most powerful women, one of the most biggest positions of power you could be in America as an Asian woman, but it's still she was getting intense harassment and was eventually kicked out by the board of directors, and if I have it correctly. And Asian American struggle is gonna follow you no matter what levels of power you have. Cis white hetero men have the power to put you down simply because you're a woman of color or a person of color, no matter what your position of power is, no matter how much influence you have. If you think you can hide up into Asianness, into your position of power, Gamergate itself has proven that's not true. And then also just positive stuff. My classmates, I just played their games last Thursday. Really amazing stuff. We have Toby Doe's I don't know how to pronounce it, Nguola, part 1. It's about an esports player, Vietnamese American woman who's come back to Vietnam after living in California for a while, And yeah, it's really great games. 8 minutes, really fully realized, really up there, along with all the other kind of like indie games happening. Really excited to promote that. And then also, I also played Krishan's Go and Come Back, which is about going through the memories of a father, of a grandfather who's like gone through the Sri Lankan civil war, and yeah, there's many twists and turns in it, and yeah, really great game. Fantastic, really up there compared to like just up there with like any of like the indie classics that we're seeing today, and yeah, definitely want to promote that. And then also in tabletop, there's Unbreakable RPG, made by some of the creators of Asians Rep, the Twitch stream I was promoting before. Really great. Yeah, please check it out. So yeah, what are some future opportunities for Asian American game design? There can be Asian historical fiction situated in an Asian context made by Asian American developers. So it could be like about it could be like there's this genre called silk punk that's kind of this emerging kind of like community of like on Tumblr and stuff and that kind of thing, and also Old West, Asians in the Old West, Asian American historical issues directly engaging with their conflict, like in Japanese internment and like civil rights and stuff like that, and also contemporary Asian American issues, so like Bong Joon-ho winning Parasite this year, winning many Academy Awards for Parasite this year, COVID-19, To Thao, and yeah, conclusions from that. So yeah, some conclusions before we get into like some more stuff afterwards. Some conclusions. Asian Americans and their history are erased in America. Asians are a heterogeneous group, they're not a monolithic model minority. Harassment and suppression happen at even high levels of education, management, and media. There's like this consistent erasure of intersectional identities within Asian American identity. And also there's even the erasure of Asian identity. When I was looking at this, because like even multiple times, even I was like had to remind myself, oh, this person is Asian. Like I was like, I didn't think of them that way before, even though like they're very clearly Asian. And it's just like kind of like this internalization of like just like not thinking about like Asian identity being part of like these different peoples, these different creators and different influencers that are I don't know, like maybe not making it super present in their lives that they have an Asian background. But like if you don't make it present and if you don't acknowledge it, then other people will. And yeah, and hopefully you've allied yourself with other people of color and human rights and your community to support you. Yeah. So yeah, yeah, speaking to that last point, in general, I found that like there seems to be a lack of solidarity amongst Asian Americans, amongst Asian American game devs. And why? Well, we've kind of like gone over that. Like we're trying to draw attention away from our Asianness, our foreignness, because of internalized racism and internalized white supremacy. We're trying to hide up into model minority status. There's a lack of education of our history, even by our education systems, even by our parents who don't know about Asian American history. We have this distancing from other minorities, and also like kind of like we want to like be able to hide into white privilege. Yeah, and that happens even for myself, that I found. And pretty much that's kind of the default status of Asian Americans, unless you make if you're just raised up in this society without deliberate effort. And yeah, that's kind of like something that Asian Americans have to be conscious of, and other non-Asian Americans have to be conscious of. How does this tie into the current day? Hiding up into white privilege is not enough. Asian American minority / white privilege is not enough. You cannot bank on Asian privilege to save you. Even if you think you can remain neutral on these issues, other people will not be able to necessarily see it that way. That's true with the LA riots with Korean Americans. That's true with Peter Liang in 2016. That's true with Vincent Chin. That's true with, throughout these generations of issues, even in 2020. And the reason you should do that is, like, if you're trying to hide up into white supremacy, if you're like trying to like play by white supremacy's game, and Asian American rights is not just the rights of Asian Americans above all others. It's the rights of Asian Americans as human rights, as an integrated conflict between all people's struggle who suffer from white supremacy, from patriarchy, from curiarchy. Asian American rights is supposed to be hand in hand with solidarity amongst all identities. And Yellow Peril once again supports Black Power to this day. And also like a big, and also beyond just Asian American issues, but also part of Asian American issues as part of this solidarity is the acknowledgement that Asian Americans suffer from mental health issues as a community, as an under discussed issue due to stigma in Asian American communities. Very common in marginalized communities to suffer from mental health issues. I should try to find better wording for that. I don't like saying like suffering from mental health issues, from like dealing with mental health issues and persisting through mental health issues. But through that is also dealing with racial trauma, and when any groups of marginalized status try to collaborate and have solidarity with each other, they have to negotiate the many different layers of like hierarchy and levels of knowledge and cultural competency through each other's racial trauma. So taking care of mental health is super important while having solidarity, because otherwise everyone's racial trauma will bump up against each other, and that's usually, I feel like I've seen that time and time again, is like usually what dissolves movements, and people suffer from compassion fatigue, and if we don't support each other, if we don't take care of our mental health, we're going to burn out as Asian Americans, as people who are for human rights. Mental health is an important part of like any moment of protest or solidarity. Just to kind of plug some great orgs, Game Devs of Color Expo, as mentioned previously. There's also Asian American Arts Organizations, Asian American Writers Workshop, who has a fellowship by fellow NYU alum Imperatrice Ung, and Asian American Feminist Collective is also great. From what I've seen, I don't know people there personally, but I don't know, it seems like they're doing great work just from the outside. And also Asian American Analog Games have this great community that's starting up. I feel like it's very recently starting up. Asians Represent and Asian Analog Gaming Professionals. Hopefully more things are coming along the way. I will say, like, these things are very nascent and starting up. There's not many. There's a reason I have this GIF. It's like, it feels like it's literally like dozens of us talking about this. Like, it's really, there's some people it's already having an effect and having space for conversations, but it's very early. But yeah, hopefully it can keep growing, and hopefully having these conversations like this can help grow those movements even further. So summary. Asian Americans have a history and an identity. There's this model minority misnomer, the desire to hide up, and dilemma to hide up as a minority in games, outside of games. There's this I have a proposal for like these principles of Asian American game design for proper representation and solidarity. I've shown like games that have engaged with that Asian American game design framework of representation and identity. And I've also given us a lot of homework to work on things, to work on this continuous struggle of like understanding our place in America, and for other people to understand our place in America. It's a continuous struggle. You have to do this over and over. You have to persevere daily. So that's it. We're coming up towards the end of 2 hours now. Thank you for listening. Yeah, you can follow me. I don't know what my next major thing to plug right now, but like all my stuff I promote is on Twitter. You can find me at twitter.com/Charles H. Huang. Feel free to email me if you prefer that. contact@charleshhuang.com. Yeah, this is me at Babycastles in last fall, presenting at the Chinese Games exhibition. Being a puppet host. It was my first paid gig as a puppeteer. Very proud of that. And yeah, this was a presentation for Babycastles Academy. Please support Babycastles at withfriends.co/babycastles for a one-time donation or a monthly subscription. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. I'm willing to hang around for a couple of questions and whatnot. But yeah, please check out all that stuff. Yeah, please plug all this stuff. Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, folks. I'm glad y'all could be here. Yeah, this has been great. Feel free to chime in with any questions. I'll hang around for a little bit, I guess. But yeah, thank you for tuning in. Yay, clap, 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 clap. Yeah, plug Babycastles. Yeah, plug Babycastles. Yeah. All right. Feel free. Any questions or yeah. All right. I'm gonna just take thanks and compliments. Also, if you don't have questions, yeah, whatever you want to say. But I don't know. I just saw a B movie recently. How do I view the relationship between developing a Pan-American Asian identity versus that of individual countries? Pan-American Asian identity. Is that I feel like there's multiple things there. I don't know if it's like Pan-American Asian identity. I feel like communicates to me like between like U.S. and okay, Pan-Asian American identity. Gotcha. Okay. No, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean like that's historical. That's a historical issue. Even in like during Japanese internment during World War II, there's also like a lot of persecution against Chinese and Korean Americans at the same time. They were viewed as like lumped the same way. With the murder of Vincent Chin, Chinese American, Asian Americans were discriminated against. During COVID-19, discrimination against Asian Americans happens. Even if you're not Chinese, like there's like this joke by like I think Love Life of an Asian guy that was like, oh, like my mom said she wanted to speak Thai to like distance herself from being Chinese, and like that's adorable. Like she thought that like Americans are gonna like be able to tell Thai from like Chinese and like not view all Asian Americans as the same. It is a heterogeneous identity. It is a coalition. The thing is like we do face very similar issues and there's a lot of overlap. So yeah, in America at least, Asian American identity is tied to each other. And if you were to, I mean, it's a very similar principle to like solidarity in general. Like if you allow them to break you up and if you watch out for yourselves and you allow them to break you up, then you as an individual don't have a leg to stand on when like you need help from other folks of other communities. So yeah, like Asian American struggle is very similar and has a lot of overlap, and furthermore is strengthened by having solidarity with other groups, both Pan-Asian groups in America and also both across Asian American identities in America from different countries. And of course that gets complicated because of like the history of like the Cold War. But yeah, I mean Asian American identity needs to have solidarity, and also solidarity with other marginalized groups in America, including Black Americans, including marginalized genders and sexes, including differently abled Americans. It's all the same issue in my eyes. That's my stance on it. Yeah, that takes a lot of cultural competency. Like it's very complicated to like know all the cultural competency of like all those different groups at the same time. I was just doing a deep dive into like the history of Taiwan My parents are from Taiwan, and their history is very complicated. Just having cultural competency of one country is very complicated, much less like of a whole continent even. So yeah, I know. But yeah, that ties into mental health, being aware of like racial trauma and like being able to navigate racial trauma and have solidarity with others while navigating your own personal trauma is very complicated. Great question. I hope that answers it. Maybe a few more minutes. Cool, no problem. Great. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, yeah, if you just view, I mean, like, one of my major takeaways that ties into current day is, like, if you just view Asian American struggle as, like, seeking strength for Asian Americans alone, or Asians alone, or your own nationality alone, then that's like a red herring. You've played into imperialism. You played into nationalism. You played into the history of colonization. True. I don't know. My sense is true Asian American identity is the identity of human rights and the struggle of like suffering and acknowledgement of suffering across the world of any identity. Yeah, I don't know. I hope maybe that's a good conclusion. Maybe I'll just leave it there. I don't know. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, maybe it's 5 o'clock. Maybe we'll end right there. All right, thanks for tuning in. Follow me on Twitter, Charles H. Huang. Email me, contact@charleshanshuang.com. Please support Babycastles with friends.co/babycastles for donations. And Babycastles has some great stuff coming up this coming week. Follow their schedule on twitch.tv/babycastles or babycastles.com. And check out all these other great organizations. Game Devs of the Color Expo, Asian American Writers Workshop, Asian American Feminist Collective, Asians Represent, and Asian Analog Gaming Professionals. And stay tuned for more stuff. Keep an eye out for it. It's once again, it's a struggle that you have to persevere through daily. And if we were all cis white hetero males, able-bodied, things would be much easier for us. But because we're part of this struggle, it's part of like this continuous work and acknowledging when we've made missteps and navigating our racial and marginalized traumas and being able to act in solidarity with others and ourselves and doing self-care, which I have not been doing this past week through all the news happening. But yeah, self-care is super important through all of this. Cool. All right, well, I'll wrap up there. Please take care. All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Babycastles Academy is on Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. All right. Anyway, take care.